windows, and that was intentional. The Galactic Tribunal did not want the accused looking at stars. They wanted the accused looking at them. There were 9 of them seated behind a curved bench of black stone that rose nearly 3 meters off the floor. 9 alien faces, 9 sets of eyes, all pointed at me. Counselor Drav Hess sat at the center, tall and pale-scaled, with flat amber eyes that never blinked the way human eyes do. He had the kind of stillness that powerful beings cultivate over centuries. He had practiced looking unmoved at things that should have moved him. I had been staring at him for 2 full days, and I could not catch him blinking once. My name is Davith Kale, Sergeant Major, 7th Human Expeditionary Corps, retired by force and sentenced to death by careful language. I was in restraints, not metal, but a field system that pressed against my wrists and ankles like cold water hardened into bands. My uniform had been reduced to the base layer. No rank insignia, no service medals. They had stripped everything that told the room who I was before they decided who I would be. That was intentional. Everything about this room was intentional. The charge, as Drav Hess read it in that slow, rehearsed cadence, was unauthorized unilateral combat action, resulting in the termination of a Veth Allied officer during a protected humanitarian operation. He paused after reading it, the way someone pauses after delivering a line they have practiced enough times to enjoy. I had shot Commander Veth Arak through the chest with a plasma sidearm from 11 meters. I had done it in front of 43 witnesses. I had done it calmly, without hesitation, while Arak was in the middle of giving the order to execute 412 unarmed refugees, sealed in a cargo hold on Relay Post Devon 6. Every one of those 412 people was still alive. That detail was not read into the court record. I had served in the 7th Corps for 19 years. 2 early tours in remote relay network maintenance, then 9 years of field assignments across 4 different corridor systems. I had been in situations where the math did not work in my favor more times than I could count easily, and I had learned early that the soldiers who survived those situations were not always the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who refused to accept the situation as it had been defined for them. They looked at what was in front of them and found the angle that no one else had bothered to look for. My lawyer was a human named Owen Price, a small and careful man who sweated through his collar during every session and spent most of the proceedings looking at the floor in front of him rather than at the 9 faces behind the bench. He had told me privately, 3 days before sentencing, that there was nothing he could do. The human government had made its decision. They would not go to war with the Veth Confederation over one soldier who had, technically, committed the act he was accused of. We have to think about the bigger picture, Owen had said. I looked at him for a long time without answering. 412 people, I said. He did not respond. So I sat in the chair before the tribunal, and I listened to Drav Hess read the sentence, and I kept my face the way Owen kept his eyes, fixed on a point just below what mattered, and I looked for the angle. Banishment, not execution, because execution would produce a public reaction among humans that the tribunal could not comfortably manage. Banishment, to Relay Station Keth 9, a decommissioned deep space waypoint in the outer corridor, 41 light-years from the nearest inhabited system, dark for 60 years. No active power grid, no atmospheric restoration in operation, no functional communication array. The tribunal record listed it as non-viable for habitation. 30 days of emergency rations would be provided, a basic survival suit, a standard-issue multi-tool kit. Drav Hess described this, with the careful language of a man coached thoroughly by lawyers, as a compassionate alternative to capital punishment that allows the convicted party a period of natural resolution. Natural resolution. I genuinely admired the phrase. It meant, you will die out there, but we will not technically be the ones responsible. No execution order in the record. No application of direct force. Just a man, and a dead station, and 30 days of food, and the patient mathematics of biology, doing the work afterward. The chamber was full. Diplomats and observers and journalists from a dozen species filled the viewing areas. I looked across all of them until I found one human face. Colonel Petra Vance, my commanding officer. standing at the back of the chamber near the exit doors. She was not supposed to be there. She had come anyway. She was standing very straight in the way soldiers stand when they are holding themselves together by discipline alone. She mouthed 2 words at me through the crowd. I could not hear them across that distance and over the ambient sound of the room. I did not need to hear them. I nodded once. Then they took me out. The transport to Keth 9 took 11 days. I spent the entire journey in a small sealed compartment, with a single viewport the size of my palm. They fed me through a slot at scheduled intervals. The 2 Veth guards outside my door never spoke to me, and I never spoke to them. I slept more than I had in years. I have learned over a long career that panic is not the enemy. Panic is just energy pointed in the wrong direction. The skill is not suppressing it. The skill is redirecting it towards something that helps you. So I slept and I let my body rest, and I let my mind work quietly in the background, the way a good engine idles without wasting fuel. On the 9th day I started talking to myself. Not because I was losing my grip on things, but because I needed to hear a voice organizing thoughts out loud. I went through everything I had learned during those early maintenance tours about decommissioned space infrastructure, about what these stations were built from, and what they needed to run, and what the difference was between a system that was dead and a system that was only switched off. Decommissioned and destroyed are very different words. The tribunal had used the former without fully understanding what the latter would have required. On the 11th day the transport docked. One guard handed me the crate of rations. The other handed me the multi-tool kit. Neither one looked at me. The airlock cycled. I stepped through into Keth 9. The cold hit first. -14 degrees Celsius, confirmed by the suit sensors, alongside an oxygen reading that was low but technically breathable, if you did not make any sudden demands on your lungs. The emergency lighting ran at a dim orange along the corridor walls, which is the color things go when they are running out of options. But it is also the color of things that are still running. There is an important distinction there. I stood in the airlock threshold with my crate of rations and my multi-tool kit, and let my eyes adjust, and looked at what was in front of me. Corridors. Sealed pressure doors at the far end. Utility conduit runs along the ceiling, disappearing into the dark ahead. The bones of something that had been built by the Keth, a civilization of meticulous engineers who had collapsed 3 centuries ago and left their constructions scattered across the outer corridor for other species to find. The Keth were gone. Their stations were not. I stood in the dim orange light for a moment. Then I said, out loud, to the empty station, "All right then, let's see what you've got." I started walking. Relay stations of this era followed a consistent design logic, and I navigated by reading the utility conduit positions on the ceiling, the way you read road signs. It took 40 minutes to reach the reactor core. It was in the lowest level of the station, cold and dark, about the size of a transport truck. The primary fuel cells had fully discharged over 60 years of abandonment. But the containment housing was intact. The shielding had not cracked. The feed lines were corroded at the surface, but had not been severed anywhere along their length. Cracked and corroded are entirely different problems. One means you are building from zero. The other means you are cleaning and reconnecting. I sat on the floor in front of the reactor core in the orange light, and I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened the multi-tool kit, and I got to work. What I found in the next 7 hours changed the entire calculation. Behind the main reactor housing, through a maintenance panel that required 45 minutes of careful work to open without snapping the tool, I found the station's engineering log, physical format, ceramic-encoded data plates, the kind the Keth used for permanent documentation, because ceramic encoding lasts 10,000 years in vacuum, and they understood that permanence mattered. Every system on the station was documented. Every repair procedure, every component specification mapped out in engineering diagrams that did not require language to understand, because engineering diagrams are engineering diagrams regardless of who drew them. I set up camp right there beside the reactor, because it was the most protected point on the station, and because I understood already that I was going to be spending most of my time with it. I ate 1/4 of my daily ration allowance. I set the multi-tools timer to wake me in 4 hours. Before I closed my eyes, I recorded the first voice log on my suit's internal system. Day 1, I said. Life support is running at minimum. Reactor is cold, but the housing is intact. Found the engineering documentation. Starting the repair assessment first thing tomorrow. 30 days of rations at full draw. More if I reduce the daily allocation. A pause. If someone finds this and I'm not here to explain it, I did not come out here to die. I came out here because they sent me. There is a difference between those two things, and it matters. I turned off the log. Outside the station, 41 light years from anyone who knew my name, or cared whether I was still breathing, the stars continued their slow and indifferent turn in the dark. The corridor from the chamber to the transport bay was long and white, and absolutely silent. The two guards who walked me through it did not speak, and they did not look at me. They had been trained to manage the interval between sentence and transport the way you manage anything that requires precision without emotion, by treating it as a task, with defined steps, rather than as a human moment. I walked between them and I looked at the white corridor and I thought about what I knew. I knew Keth 9 was a Keth construction relay station. I knew Keth construction used redundant systems. I knew that decommissioned meant the power was off and the crew was gone, not that the bones were broken. I knew that 2 tours of relay maintenance, even years ago, were 2 tours of relay maintenance that I still carried in my hands and my memory. I knew that the tribunal had chosen this specific station because they believed its condition made survival impossible. That belief was based on an assessment of the station. It was not based on an assessment of me. The distinction mattered. Owen Price was waiting at the transport bay entrance. He had his case in his hand and his collar was damp, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who knew he had failed and had decided the only thing he could do about it now was be present at the end. I tried, he said. I know, I said. I'm sorry, Sergeant Major, he said. Don't be, I said. Go home. He looked at me with something that was not quite confusion and not quite understanding. A state in between. Then the guards moved me forward, and the bay doors opened, and the transport was there. I stepped aboard and did not look back at Owen Price, or at the white corridor, or at the chamber beyond it. There was nothing behind me that I needed to carry forward. The only direction that mattered now was ahead. The airlock sealed. The transport separated from the station. The stars came into view through the viewport, and among them, 41 light-years away and completely invisible at this distance, was the dead station where the tribunal expected me to die. I looked at the stars. I started planning. I slept better than I had in years. The Keth had built Keth 9 to last. That was the single greatest advantage I had, and they had no way of knowing they were giving it to me when they sealed these doors 60 years ago and walked away from a civilization they already knew was ending. 60 years of abandonment had done real damage, the kind that comes from time rather than force. Seals had dried and cracked in the pressure cycles. Lubricants had crystallized in the joints. Electrical contacts had corroded at the surface wherever moisture had condensed during the station's long, cold decades. But the bones of the station, the pressure hull, the structural framework, the core engineering architecture underneath all of that surface decay, those were solid as the day they were laid. The Keth built for permanence. They built in redundancy at every level. They assumed things would go wrong, and they designed for what came after the going wrong. That design philosophy was the difference between a ruin and a resource. On day 2, I found the secondary power cell bank. It was behind a wall panel in the engineering corridor, sealed under a ceramic plate that took 3 hours of careful study before I understood how to open it without triggering the safety lockout that would have shorted the cells permanently. The cells were not dead. They were at 4% of their rated capacity. 4% of a secondary bank designed to run a station of this size was not enough to run the lights. But it was enough to power my suit's external charge adapter, and that adapter could run the multi-tool's high-draw cutting and welding functions without draining my primary suit battery. I scratched that calculation on the wall of the engineering corridor in large strokes using a metal fastener pulled from a loose ceiling panel. I wrote it where I would see it every single time I walked past. 4% is not 0. 4% is a start. By day 4, I had the reactor's auxiliary ignition circuit fully mapped from the Keth engineering diagrams. The primary fuel cells were empty, but the station used a two-stage system. The primary cells handled the main output. The auxiliary circuit was a lower draw emergency loop, running on a different fuel compound, one that could be synthesized from atmospheric trace gases if you had the correct process, enough patience to run the reaction slowly, and a sealed environment to run it in safely. I had all three of those things. The synthesis process took 9 days. I ran it inside my suit's sealed environment, because several of the intermediate compounds in the reaction chain were not anything I wanted to breathe in an enclosed space. I used components pulled from non-critical systems throughout the station, stripping them with the methodical care of someone who understands that every piece wasted is a problem deferred. Every step went into the engineering log I had started keeping in the margin spaces of the Keth maintenance manual, writing in thin, careful scratches because space on the pages mattered. On day 13, I ran the auxiliary circuit startup sequence. The reactor vibrated. Something in the upper housing made a sound like a heavy object dropped from a short height. Then, at 7% of rated output, it caught. Power moved through the auxiliary loop. The emergency lighting strips on the engineering level shifted from orange to white. I sat on the floor and looked at the white lights for almost a full minute without moving. Then I said, "Okay," and stood up and kept working. With auxiliary power running, I could access the station's internal systems at a basic level. 2 of the 4 atmospheric processors were too corroded to save without replacement components I did not have. The other 2 responded to the power input and began cycling. Slowly, the temperature in the engineering section started climbing toward a range that would not damage exposed tissue over extended time. Within 18 hours, the suit's external sensor was reading that the air in the section was cold but survivable. On day 15, I removed my helmet indoors for the first time. The air tasted like old metal and recycled dust and something faintly organic that I could not identify. It was still the best thing I had inhaled in 2 weeks. I sat on the floor of the engineering bay, eating half a ration bar and breathing real atmosphere, thin and stale but genuinely real. And I allowed myself that specific satisfaction for about 30 seconds before I went back to the work list. It was while I was sitting there that I found the passive scanner. It was not on the station schematics, which meant a Keth engineer had installed it independently during the station's active years, probably someone who had the same instinct I had about wanting to know what was moving nearby. It was tucked behind a panel near the communications room, a small unit about the size of a thick hardcover book, powered by its own isolated trickle-charge battery that had maintained current through 60 years of abandonment, through some design feature I could not fully reverse engineer, but was deeply grateful for. The display was cracked. One receiver array had snapped clean off at the mount, but when I connected it to the auxiliary power loop, the unit turned on. It showed me a sphere of space centered on Keth 9 out to 40 light-years. The display flickered at the edges, but mass signatures were visible. Energy readings. The faint residual traces that objects in space leave on sensitive instruments whether they want to be seen or not. Most of the sphere was empty. But at the very edge of the display, drifting on a slow elliptical trajectory that would bring it within 2 light hours of the station in approximately 19 days, was a mass signature that did not belong to any natural object. Too regular, too consistent in its movement pattern. Old movement, but movement. A ship, or what remained of one. I spent 8 days fixing the scanner. I rebuilt the antenna array from wire pulled out of non-essential conduit runs throughout the station, formed by hand into the configuration I needed. I replaced the cracked display panel with a flat piece of polymer sheeting I had found in a storage locker, shaped it with the thermal cutting edge of the multi-tool, and wired it into the output circuit using copper trace I had extracted from a dead control board with a pair of salvaged probe tips. The new display was cleaner than the original, because the original had been showing me a degraded image of what the instrument was actually capable of. On day 23, with the scanner fully operational and upgraded, I was looking at the drifting object with enough resolution to confirm it was a Thulek-class bulk freighter. Running lights dead, drive emissions completely cold. It had been drifting for years. Whatever had happened to the crew, they were gone, and had been gone for a long time. The ship was going to pass within range of a spacewalk in 4 days. A spacewalk with no thruster pack, because my suit's maneuvering thrusters had been disabled before I was loaded onto the transport. The tribunal was thorough about details that mattered to their calculation. They were less thorough about details that did not fit their imagination of what I might do. On day 24, I found 3 pressurized atmospheric gas canisters in the supply locker. Standard emergency suit refill stock. Each one held enough compressed gas to produce meaningful directional force, if vented through a controlled nozzle with precise timing. I built the nozzle from a pipe fitting, a pressure regulator valve stripped from a broken atmospheric maintenance unit, and a metal bracket I bent by hand against the edge of the reactor housing until it held the right angle. I spent 2 full days in the main corridor practicing valve timing until I could control the output duration with the consistency that the trajectory calculations required. I wrote every number on the wall next to the 4% calculation: trajectory, burn durations, drift correction intervals, contingency burns if the approach went wide. On day 27, I sealed my helmet, walked to the exterior airlock, and stepped out into open space. The silence of open space is a physical thing, in a way that is difficult to describe to anyone who has not felt it. It presses against the suit the way dense atmosphere presses against the skin. A full surface pressure with no sound inside it, except your own breathing, and the faint mechanical hiss of life support cycling. The station fell away behind me, as I cleared the airlock threshold, and I made a deliberate choice not to look back at it, because looking back would not help me reach the freighter. I fired the first canister in a 3-second burst exactly as I had practiced. The force was somewhat stronger than the calculation had suggested. I tumbled, corrected with a half-second burn from the second canister, and stabilized. Then I drifted. 12 hours before I needed to reach the freighter or accept that I was going to miss it, exhaust my remaining air, and never find out what was aboard. I used all 12 of those hours. I burned the canisters in short, careful pulses, constantly recalculating against the freighter's drift. 3 times I was certain I had overcorrected on the approach vector. Twice I thought the final distance was going to be just beyond what I could cover. I caught the hull with 40 minutes of air remaining. The freighter's exterior was cold under my hands as I pulled myself along toward the docking ring. I got the cargo bay open with the multi-tool and genuine patience, and floated inside and turned on my helmet light. The beam cut through the silence of the dead ship, and fell across the far wall. The fabrication unit was against that wall. Mid-grade, the kind used on independent freighters for in-transit repair work. Its reserve battery had not fully discharged in the years it had been drifting. When I connected it to my suit's diagnostic port and ran the compatibility check, it responded immediately. In a sealed utility locker behind it, a full set of engineering hand tools in a fitted case, a plasma welder with 2 full fuel cells, a structural adhesive kit, a sensor calibration rig I could repurpose for no fewer than 6 different tasks on my repair list, and stenciled in 3 languages on the cargo bay access hatch. In text I could read from the translation banks I had worked through on the transport. Agricultural seed stock, hydroponic grade, sealed vacuum canisters, 400 units. I floated there in the dark of the dead freighter, with my helmet light holding steady, and I looked at all of it for a long moment. Then I said, out loud, to the empty ship, I am going to live. Not with relief. Not with the dramatic exhale of someone who had been uncertain. With the specific, grounded certainty of a calculation that has finally reached its answer. A statement of observable fact. Getting the cargo back to the station took 4 more days. I could not move the fabrication unit through open space the way I had moved myself. I had to work the freighter's emergency maneuvering system, which had just barely enough reserve power to position the ship within cable distance of Keth 9's secondary docking port. On day 31, 1 day past my official death date, according to the tribunal's ration arithmetic, I pulled the last cargo crate through the docking seal and into the station corridor. I sat down on the floor in my suit and gave myself exactly 60 seconds of doing nothing at all. Then I stood up, unsealed my helmet, breathed my own atmosphere, and started planting seeds. The hydroponic bay went in first, because food is the foundation of everything else. I converted a mid-level storage room, sealed the draft gaps with fabricated strips, ran heating conduits from the auxiliary reactor circuit along the ceiling and walls, and built grow racks from structural tubing I fabricated to the specifications printed on the seed canisters. I planted the first seeds on day 38. The atmospheric processors came next. With the plasma welder I could fabricate replacement components for the 2 dead units from raw mineral ore in the freighter's cargo stock, working from the Keth engineering diagrams that I had studied long enough by then to read the notation even without being able to read the words. Both processors were running within 2 weeks of sustained fabrication work. By day 52, the station was warm enough throughout the engineering and mid-levels that I could walk the full route from the docking section to the reactor bay in a base layer uniform without a suit, and not feel the cold working its way through me. The lights ran clean and steady on the expanding power grid. The air was clear. My workshop was organized with tools on a fabricated rack, and components sorted into labeled containers that I had made from cut sections of the polymer sheeting. I had a home. Not the one I would have chosen, and not the one I deserved by any measure I would have applied before the tribunal's sentencing, but something built by my own hands, piece by piece, in a place that had been specifically selected for its ability to end me. That distinction matters more than it might seem to someone who has never had to make it. On day 61, I repaired the long-range receiver. The transmitter component was beyond recovery without a part I did not have, and could not fabricate. But the receiver responded and came online. I could hear the corridor. I could not speak into it yet. I began monitoring traffic. This was the detail the tribunal had not considered when they chose Keth 9. They had chosen it for isolation, for the distance, for the certainty that nothing out there would help me. What they had not thought through was why the Keth had built a relay station at that precise location. The Keth did not build infrastructure randomly. They built at gravitational corridor intersections, points where the natural geometry of local star systems created pathways that reduced travel time and fuel consumption significantly. Keth 9 sat at one of those intersections. The corridor running through Keth 9's space was not on any current tribunal navigation chart, because the tribunal maintained control over which routes were publicly known, and this one they had apparently preferred to keep quiet. But the corridor was there regardless, and ships were using it. Independent haulers, unregistered transports, the kind of traffic that moves through unmapped routes, precisely because those routes avoid checkpoints and official scrutiny, and the questions that come with both. Nobody was transmitting openly, but passive sensors do not need open transmission to build a picture. Mass signatures, drive emissions, gravitational displacement readings, all of it accumulated into a record that I began logging and cross-referencing against the knowledge I had, and adding to every day. Keth 9 was on a busy road. Everyone who used it believed the road had no stops. On day 85, my first plants produced food. A leafy green variety, nothing remarkable in any kitchen anywhere in the galaxy. I stood in the hydroponic bay and pulled a leaf from the nearest rack, and ate it straight, and the taste of fresh food grown from nothing, in a dead station 41 light-years from anyone who had wanted me alive, hit me in a way I had not fully prepared myself for. I added a second rack that afternoon. By day 90, atmospheric coverage had expanded to 3 additional station sections. I had a proper workshop. I had a rest area with a sleeping surface I had built from polymer sheeting and structural foam. I had a monitoring station where I spent 2 hours every morning tracking corridor traffic and updating the log files. My voice log that night was short. I sat at the monitoring station in the quiet of the station's night cycle and I said, "Whoever finds this, I am not finished. I have not been found. I have not been rescued, and I have not given up. 90 days out from where they left me, and I am eating food I grew myself in a station they told 11 governments was non-viable for habitation." I let the silence hold for a moment. Non-viable. That was their word for this place. Another pause. Keep that in mind. The weeks after day 90 moved with the specific productive rhythm of sustained work that has found its shape. I was building with intention, with a plan that grew more detailed as each piece I completed revealed what the next piece needed to be. The fabrication unit hummed steadily in the workshop. The corridor traffic log filled with new entries every morning. The hydroponic bay expanded to 5 racks and then 6. I fixed the long-range transmitter component problem on day 109. I found the answer not in the station inventory, but in the freighter's own navigation system, which used a different but compatible amplifier crystal type that I could adapt to the station's transmitter housing. With 2 days of careful machining work, using the multi-tool's finest cutting settings, and a fabricated mounting bracket. When the transmitter came online and I keyed my first transmission into the corridor, I sat for a moment before speaking, and thought about what the first words from this station in 60 years should be. I keyed the standard navigation identification signal that any ship system would recognize automatically, and gave the station a name. Keth's Wake. I had taken it from the Keth engineering log. The engineers who last worked here had written a phrase at the end of their final maintenance record, written at the day they sealed the doors and walked away from a civilization they already knew was dying around them. I had spent enough time with the language by then to understand the translation. What remains after a civilization has passed. They had meant it about themselves, about the Keth civilization that was ending while they wrote. I took it anyway. From a different angle, it described something accurate about this specific station and the specific person who had been sent to it. The first ships that docked after I began transmitting were cautious. They came in slowly, queried the station identification repeatedly, asked careful questions over the channel before they would commit to an approach. They were not used to stops on this corridor. They did not fully trust a stop that had not been there before. But they came, because a refueling stop 41 light-years from the nearest alternative is a refueling stop regardless of whether you are entirely certain you trust it, and the alternative is drifting. I kept the voice logs going every day, not because I believed anyone was listening, because the discipline of organizing each day into a clear summary kept my thinking sharp and my sense of time intact. Isolation distorts your relationship with time if you let it. I did not let it. It was the vibration through the floor that told me first. A low metallic resonance moving up through the hull and into the soles of my boots while I was working at the fabrication bench on day 184. Not an alarm, because the proximity alert system was still on my repair list and had not yet moved near the top of it. Just the physical fact of something large connecting with the exterior of the station at a docking port. Someone was docking without permission and without prior communication. I moved to the monitoring station and pulled up the camera feed I had restored weeks earlier using lens assemblies salvaged from the dead freighter's own external cameras. The image was grainy but clear enough. 3 figures in environmental suits were cutting through the secondary docking port seal with a commercial plasma cutter. Their ship was compact and heavily modified, with aftermarket hull plating bolted directly over what had originally been a Thulek light hauler frame. No visible registration markings on any surface I could see. Scavengers. Their drive signature had been on the passive array for 6 hours before they arrived, which was long enough for me to run a species identification from the engine configuration in the tribunal database files I had acquired through the freighter's navigation system. Almost certainly Thulek. The Thulek were not soldiers, and they were not tribunal agents. They were opportunists, a small and quick species with large flat ears and eyes built for low-light environments, who made their living by detecting power signatures in places that were supposed to be dead, and stripping whatever was worth taking before anyone could stop them. I had 6 months of built infrastructure inside this station. The hydroponic bay that was feeding me. The atmospheric processors keeping me breathing. The workshop where every tool was exactly where I had put it. The monitoring station that was my window on a 100 light-year corridor of space. I was not going to allow any of it to be touched. I also had 6 months of knowing every corner of Keth 9, the way you only know a space, when you have crawled through every duct and opened every panel, and rebuilt every system by hand in the dark. I knew where sound traveled through the hull, and where the thick sections absorbed it. I knew which pressure controls on the main board could isolate sections independently. I knew which lighting breakers I could pull without affecting life support or atmospheric cycling. I knew the station the way a person knows a place they built themselves. The 3 figures cut through the docking seal and stepped inside. I turned off the lights in the docking corridor. Through the internal microphone network I had wired into the monitoring station from speaker units salvaged throughout the station, I could hear them clearly. Short, sharp vocalizations in Thulek dialect. I had spent 3 months working through the translation database from the freighter, studying every language those banks contained. Because in a corridor full of ships from a dozen different species, knowing what people were saying when they thought no one was listening was worth more than almost any other form of intelligence. Power is active, the first one said. Stronger than the scan suggested. Recent work, the second one said. Look at these conduit runs. These are new installation. A pause. Movement sounds. Then the third one said, in a quieter register, someone is here. I opened the intercom channel to the docking section and let the static sit on the line for 5 deliberate seconds, long enough for all 3 of them to register that the intercom was active, that someone was on the other end and had chosen silence as their first communication. Then I moved. Not toward them directly. I moved through the maintenance corridors running parallel to the main passageways, along the interior path I had mapped thoroughly in my second week on the station, and I got ahead of them. I positioned myself in the maintenance shaft above the utility hub junction, the choke point I had identified months ago as the best single control position on that level. When the 3 figures came through the junction below me, I vented the section behind them through the pressure management system. Not dangerously. Just enough differential to trigger the automatic safety lockout on the section doors. The sound of heavy pressure doors sealing in complete darkness behind 3 people who thought they were alone, exploring a dead station, is a very significant sound. I heard all 3 of them stop moving instantly. I activated the intercom speaker mounted directly above their position and said, in clear Thulek, you are in section 4 of Keth 9. The section behind you is sealed. The section ahead will seal if you continue another 15 meters. Complete silence. Then the one I had identified as the leader from their movement patterns said, very carefully, in the trade language, who is there? The station, I said. Keth 9 is decommissioned, the second one said. It is not registered to any current authority. It is now, I said. More silence. A quick exchange of low sounds between them. Then the third one, speaking slowly and clearly, said something I caught in full. There are no human stations in the outer corridor. I let a pause hold. There is one now, I said. Your options are as follows. First, you leave in peace. You take nothing that was not already aboard your ship when you docked. You tell no one what you found here. Second, you continue further into this station, in which case you will spend a significant amount of time navigating in the dark and being confused, and then you will leave anyway, but with less dignity than the first option allows. A long pause. More low exchanges. What is the third option? The leader asked. The fact that they asked for a third option rather than pushing forward told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. People who intend to force their way through a situation do not stop to ask for additional options. They push. People who ask for a third option are people who want to negotiate and are looking for a way to do it. The third option, I said, is that whoever among you is the engineer raises their right hand. Silence. A quick exchange of low sounds between all 3. Then, slowly, one arm went up, the one with the handheld light. The third figure. Go back to the docking port, I said. All 3 of you. I will meet you there in 2 minutes. I moved back through the maintenance shaft to the main corridor and walked to the docking port at a normal pace. They were all 3 there when I arrived. The leader was shorter than I had expected, barely reaching my shoulder. The second one wore a commercial salvage harness over their environmental suit, the kind with attachment points for cutting tools and collection bags. The third one, the engineer, was the smallest of the 3, with large pale eyes that were fixed on me with an expression that contained no aggression and a very large amount of calculation. They looked at me the way people look at something that does not match the mental image they had prepared. You are human, the leader said. I am, I said. Alone? Does the answer change your plans? The leader looked at the second one. The second one looked at the conduit work running along the docking corridor ceiling, clean and precisely spaced, with professional cable management, that had clearly been installed recently. The third one was still looking at me. "How long have you been here?" the third one said. "6 months," I said. She turned and looked back down the corridor behind her, at the steady lighting, at the atmospheric vent covers I had fabricated to exact tolerances, at the cable management on the secondary power feeds. She was reading all of it the way an engineer reads a space, noting quality and method, and the specific decisions that went into every visible junction. Then she turned back to me. "You did the conduit work alone," she said. "I did," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, not to either of her companions but simply to the general air in front of her, "That is not possible." "And yet," I said. The leader made a decision. I could watch it complete in their expression, the specific shift of a calculation reaching a conclusion. They said to the other two in quick Thulek, "We leave." Then to me, in the trade language, "We will not speak of this." "I appreciate that," I said. They began moving back toward their ship. The engineer was the last one through. She stopped at the threshold of the docking seal, her hand on the frame, and looked back at me one more time. Those large pale eyes were doing something careful and specific. "I have been to 43 stations in the outer corridor," she said. 6 years of salvage work. I have never seen a station brought back from this condition. Not by a full crew. Not by anyone. I said nothing. "Your secondary atmospheric processor," she said. "The unit in the mid-level port section. The intake seal on Unit 2 is going to fail within 2 weeks. You can see the stress pattern in the housing material if you know what to look for. You will need a replacement gasket of a specific diameter that your fabrication equipment cannot produce to the necessary precision." I looked at her. She held the look without flinching. "I have one in my kit," she said. "Standard salvage stock. I carry Keth series gaskets because these stations are common in the outer corridor, and someone always needs one." "What do you want for it?" I asked. She glanced back at her two companions, who had boarded their ship and were visible through the docking seal, waiting at the inner airlock. Then she turned back to me. "I want to see the rest of it," she said. "All of what you have built here." Her name was Skitek. She had been a registered engineer with the Thulek Confederation for 6 years before leaving over a contract dispute that she described to me across 45 minutes of walking through the hydroponic bay. She ran her hands along the grow rack tubing. She checked the hydration line connections and the drainage channels. She examined the lighting array I had assembled from repurposed components, asking highly specific technical questions between sections of her employment history, with the focused attention of someone who was using the answers to build a detailed picture. She installed the atmospheric gasket at hour 3 of her tour of the station. From memory, without any reference material, start to finish in 11 minutes. I watched her hands work, and thought about what it means to find exactly the right person, at exactly the right moment. When she was done, she sat on the floor of the mid-level corridor, and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "What is this place going to become?" she said. It was a very large question, delivered in a very practical tone. "A waypoint," I said. "Ships are already using this corridor. They have no stop along the full route length. They push through on minimum fuel margins, and one bad calculation leaves them drifting. Like the freighter you salvaged," she said. I had told her the story during the tour. "Like my freighter, yes," I said. She was quiet. "Then, what do you offer the ships that stop here?" "Fuel processing, atmospheric resupply, repair work, information about the corridor." "Information," she repeated, with the weight of someone who understands that word correctly, and knows it is usually the most valuable item on any list. "I have been monitoring this corridor for months," I said. "I know the patterns, I know the traffic. That has value to the right people." Those pale eyes were never entirely still. They were always processing something. She stood up and dusted her hands. "I will send a message to my network," she said. "Encrypted. Small group. People I trust enough to tell that something interesting exists in the outer corridor without being certain they will immediately attempt to take it from you." "That is a specific kind of trust," I said. "The only kind worth having," she said. She walked toward the docking port, stopped once at a conduit junction to look at the installation work there, made a small sound that I chose to interpret as professional approval, and went aboard her ship. 40 minutes later, the ship undocked and moved away into the corridor dark. I went back to the monitoring station and sat in front of the traffic display. The corridor readings continued their slow scroll of mass signatures and drive emissions. Out there in the dark between the stars, ships moved along a road they believed had no stops. They were wrong about that now. I pulled up a new log file and added a second line to the header I had not used before. Station population, 2, and rising. I sat back in the chair and watched the corridor readings and felt, for the first time in 6 months, something that was not urgency or the specific concentrated energy of an immediate problem being solved. Something quieter, more patient. I felt interested in what came next. The interest did not have to wait long. 3 ships answered Skitek's message, and they came in quick succession. Gareth arrived first, 9 days after Skitek left. A broad-shouldered human in his late 40s with grease, worked permanently into the lines of his hands, and the manner of someone who had learned that speaking briefly kept him out of trouble more reliably than elaboration ever had. He flew an independent hauler with no database registration, re-registered under a flag of convenience, and he came in slowly and queried the station identification 3 times before he committed to a dock. He stood in the airlock corridor after arrival, looking at the atmospheric reading on his wrist unit, then at the lighting, then at the conduit runs along the ceiling. Skitek said it was worth seeing, he said. She didn't prepare me adequately. What do you need? I asked. Fuel processing. Raw hydrogen stock from the last cargo pull. Drive-grade refined output. The fuel processing unit I had built from the freighter's cargo handling equipment, and the fabrication unit was not large, and did not run at commercial rates. But it ran, and it produced exactly what it claimed to. I can do that, I said. In exchange for components, I have a list. He read the list carefully, the way someone reads something before agreeing to it rather than after. You're building a transmitter array, he said. Communication array, I said. The transmitter is what I need the components for. He looked at the list again. 2 of these I have in cargo right now. 3 more I can source on 2 runs. Then we have a deal, I said. Gareth became the first regular. He ran the corridor route on a 7-week cycle, and every pass brought components or supplies and left with fuel, atmospheric resupply stock, or corridor intelligence I had compiled from the passive monitoring system. He was not sentimental about the arrangement, and neither was I, which is exactly what made it function without friction. The second ship was the one I had not fully prepared myself for. When the scanner resolved the registration markings and I identified them as Veth Confederation, I stood at the monitoring display for a long moment and let my reaction find its settled shape before I acted on any part of it. The Veth were the species whose officer I had shot, the species whose confederation had filed the charges that put me in front of the tribunal, whose counselor had read my death sentence with the satisfaction of someone closing a file. But a ship was a ship, and a crew was a crew, and registration codes do not tell you who specific people are, or what they actually need. Keth 9 station to Veth registered transport, I said over the docking channel. State your business. A pause, then a voice in the common trade language. We heard there was a working station in this corridor. We need atmospheric resupply. Our recycler is running at 60%. A recycler at 60% in the outer corridor is not yet an emergency. In 3 weeks it would be. Who told you about this station? I asked. A Thulek engineer. She did not give her name. Skitek had been selective about what she said, but not about who she told it to. That was worth noting. Dock at the secondary port, I said. 1 person off the ship at a time. The pilot who stepped off was young by Veth standards, thin-boned even for his people, which runs narrow as a species, the flat wide eyes and gray-tone scaling of his kind, but his posture was the posture of someone who had learned through experience that being conspicuous carries costs. His name was Edrin. He had left Veth Confederation service 11 months earlier, citing what he described simply as a difference of fundamental perspective. He did not elaborate, and I chose not to press. He paid for the atmospheric resupply with navigation data, an updated tribunal chart package including outer corridor mapping revisions that had not been publicly distributed. He transferred it to my systems while I ran the charge to his recycler. When the transfer completed, he stood in the docking bay and looked at me with the direct attention of someone who had made a decision about what to say and was going to say it. "You are the human from the Devon 6 incident," he said. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. Commander Arak was my direct superior officer for 2 years, before Devon 6. I waited. "He was as the record describes him," Edrin said. "The incident on Devon 6 was not the first time he gave an order of that category." He met my eyes. Directness is directness in any face, regardless of the species behind it. "I wanted you to know," he said, "that among the Veth who knew him personally, the opinion of what you did is not uniform." He went back aboard his ship. Edrin became the second regular. He brought his co-pilot Kale on his third visit and asked if there was work available in exchange for docking rights and supply shares. I said yes. They had engineering training and strong systems knowledge, and they were reliable. They moved aboard permanently on their 5th visit. The third response to Skitek's message came 6 weeks after the other 2. It was not so much a ship as a modified habitat unit someone had attached a drive system to. The kind of vessel built by people who need to move and have determination instead of resources. It carried 7 passengers, 5 adults and 2 children. They were human. They had been living on a colony station 3 corridors over that the tribunal had classified as an inactive resettlement zone and stopped supplying 2 years prior. A rumor had reached them, passed through 3 separate sources over several months, about a human in the outer corridor running a dead station alone, fragmented and distorted by the time it arrived, but with a core specific enough to follow. Their leader, Adele, stepped off the habitat unit with both children holding her hands, and looked at the docking bay with the measured, careful expression of someone who has been disappointed enough times to protect herself from hope until she has clear reason to stop. She looked at the atmospheric reading on her wrist display. She looked at the lighting. She looked at the conduit work on the ceiling. Then she looked at me. "It's real," she said. "It's real," I said. They stayed. By the end of the 14th month, the crew of Keth's Wake was 11. Skitek managed technical operations and the 2 Veth engineers. I handled strategic monitoring, corridor intelligence, and the negotiations with ships arriving weekly. Adele had expanded the hydroponic section to 8 racks and was feeding the station with surplus for sale to docking crews. The 2 children attended school in the station's secondary conference room, taught in rotation by whoever had time. On day 312, I finished building the communication transmitter. The first signal I sent was a station identification broadcast in standard navigation format. I gave the station its name, Keth's Wake. The corridor heard it for the first time. The road that had no stops had one now, and it was speaking. Gareth told me on his 8th corridor run that the tribunal had become aware of us. He had heard it from a cargo broker 2 systems over, not the specifics, just that there were reports of an unauthorized installation operating in a restricted outer corridor zone. He set down a data chip on the monitoring station console, with the particular care of someone delivering information they know is significant. I had been expecting this for months. It was not a surprise. It was a schedule. "They sent a monitor vessel out 3 weeks ago," Gareth said, holding the cup of ersatz tea that Adele had developed from one of the hydroponic varieties in a way that surprised everyone who tried it the first time. "Long-range scan, came back, filed a report. Don't know the contents." "We will find out," I said. 18 days later, a tribunal-registered investigative tender docked at the primary port under a flag request indicating official business. I watched the single figure who disembarked walk down the docking corridor on the bay camera with the deliberate, measured pace of someone composing their expression before they arrived at their destination. The face, when the camera resolved it clearly, was one I would not have been able to forget if I had tried. Counselor Drav Hess, the same flat amber eyes, the same carefully maintained stillness that powerful people wear like a second layer of skin. He had lost nothing of the deliberate authority he had carried in the tribunal chamber when he read my sentence 14 months ago. He walked through the docking bay of Keth's wake and looked at everything he passed with controlled, careful attention, and his expression as he took all of it in was extraordinarily difficult to read, which told me precisely what that composure was costing him. He had left on this trip expecting to find a barely functional ruin with a half-mad survivor running a desperate salvage operation. He arrived to find steady lighting and clean corridors, and the smell of something green and growing somewhere in the interior, and a communication array whose transmission signal he had picked up 3 light hours out from the station before he had even resolved it visually on his scanner. I walked to the docking bay and met him there. We looked at each other across the bay floor for a moment. "Sergeant Major Kale," he said. "Counselor Drav Hess," I said. His vessel had no escort. An official tribunal inspection mission would have required escort by protocol, a minimum of 2 flanking ships. The flag request he had filed on docking was in a category I had learned from Edrin's navigation package, was reserved for quiet preliminary assessments that the tribunal preferred to keep out of the formal record. He had come to see this himself before anyone else could tell him what it was and what it meant. This installation was classified as non-viable for habitation, he said. The classification was incorrect, I said. He looked past me at the corridor behind me. At the door at the far end where I could hear the low sound of Ski-Tech running a diagnostic on the secondary power loop. He looked at the atmospheric reading displayed on the station wall panel. He looked at the lighting that ran clean and unbroken all the way to the far junction. "How long did this take?" he said. 14 months, I said. Silence. A long one. "You were provided 30 days of rations," he said. "Yes," I said. He stood looking at the station for a long moment more. At the thing that should not exist in a place he had personally selected for its inability to support human survival. At all of it. "There is something I would like to show you," I said. I walked him to the monitoring station. I sat him in front of the traffic display and I showed him 14 months of passive corridor monitoring. Every ship, every drive signature, every encrypted transmission pattern cataloged, cross-referenced, and indexed against tribunal databases from Edrin's navigation package, against cargo manifests from ships that had docked, against the accumulated intelligence of more than a year of careful and consistent listening. Several of the ship identifiers were vessels the tribunal officially had on record as operating in completely different sectors of the corridor network. Not near Keth 9, not on this route at all. The official records were wrong about where those ships were and what they were doing. Several others were carrying cargo for which the tribunal had active interdiction orders that had apparently never been executed because the tribunal did not know where those ships were moving. And one registration in the manifest records belonged to a ship owned through a corporate structure, 2 holding companies deep, by a sitting member of the Galactic Tribunal. Drav Hess sat very still and looked at the display. I sat beside him, and let the silence do the work that silence does when it is allowed to hold long enough. "What do you want?" he said. His voice was exactly as level as it had been in the sentencing chamber. He was very good at that. "3 things," I said. "Keth's Wake is formally recognized as sovereign neutral territory under independent administration. No tribunal jurisdiction within the station's operational boundaries. No mandatory compliance with Confederation legal codes." He said nothing. I continued. "Retroactive reclassification of my action on Devon 6, under the justified intervention provisions in the tribunal's own foundational charter. The charter defines justified intervention explicitly for situations involving imminent mass harm to a civilian population. I acted within those provisions. Not a pardon. A classification correction. The pardon framing implies a wrongful act was committed. I did not commit one. The record should accurately reflect what I did and why." He looked at me with those amber eyes. I held the look without any particular effort. "And the 3rd, he said. "Observer status at the next tribunal session," I said. "Non-voting. 1 seat, under the independent territory representation category." He looked back at the traffic display. He looked at the corporate registration in the manifest records. He looked at it for a measured amount of time. Observer status requires a full session vote, he said. I cannot promise that outcome unilaterally. Then promise that you will not oppose the motion, I said. He stood from the chair and moved to the monitoring station doorway. He stood there with his back toward me for a moment, looking out into the corridor. The territory recognition and the classification correction, he said. I can advance both through committee process without requiring a full session. That is within my authority as a sitting councilor. And the observer status motion, I said. I will abstain, he said. I considered this. Abstain is not oppose, I said. No, he said, it is not. He left the following morning. His vessel cleared the primary docking port and moved away into the corridor, and I watched it on the external camera until it passed beyond my sensor range. Then I sat in the monitoring station and waited for whatever came next. 3 days later, a tribunal communique arrived on the communication array. Legal formatting, committee authority designation. It classified Keth's Wake as provisional autonomous territory with annual review requirements. It reclassified the Devon 6 action under justified intervention provisions of the foundational charter. The final paragraph noted that a motion for observer status representation from independent outer corridor territories had been submitted to the tribunal session calendar. I printed it on polymer sheeting and pinned it to the monitoring station wall next to the calculation I had scratched on day 2. 4% is not 0. 4% is a start. Ski-Tech came in and read the communique over my shoulder. She read it twice, the way she read everything that mattered. Provisional, she said. What does that mean practically? It means they want the ability to reverse it if the political situation changes in their favor, I said. She looked at me. Will they try? I thought about Drav Hess in the docking bay. About the specific quality of stillness in his expression as he stood looking at 14 months of corridor intelligence that had not existed in any tribunal record and that contained information no one in the tribunal chamber had known was being gathered about what that stillness had been covering. No, I said, they will not. Ski-Tech made the sound that was not entirely agreement and not entirely skepticism and went back to her calibration work. The station kept growing. Adele expanded the hydroponic section to 10 racks and began selling fresh food to every ship that docked, which was the first time Keth's Wake generated anything that could be called revenue in the conventional sense. Edrin and Kale completed a full rebuild of the station's primary communication array that extended our transmission range by a factor of 3. Gareth brought 2 more human passengers on his 9th run, a married couple named Peter and Fiona, who had been living aboard his ship for 2 runs already, because they had no fixed address and no particular destination, and who looked at the school Adele ran in the conference room, and at the hydroponic bay, and at the quiet, steady rhythm of the station, and asked if there was anything they could contribute. Peter had 15 years of mechanical experience from working transit stations in the inner corridor before a tribunal regulatory change put his employer out of business. Fiona had been an agricultural technician. The school got a second permanent teacher. The hydroponic section got an expert, who immediately identified 3 yield improvements that Adele had not considered. The population of Keth's Wake reached 15. I was in the workshop on day 406 when the secondary alert system, which I had finally finished installing and calibrating the week before, signaled an inbound vessel on an approach vector that did not match the standard docking request protocol. Not aggressive, just different. I went to the monitoring station and looked at the display. It was a tribunal diplomatic vessel, much larger than Drav Hess had arrived in, larger than any single ship that had docked at Keth's Wake since we began taking traffic. I read the registration and cross-referenced it against the Tribunal Diplomatic Registry in Edrin's data package. Outer Corridor Administrative Division, Veth Confederation Delegation Component, Human Homeworld Diplomatic Mission. All 3. 1 ship each, a full delegation. They had not sent advance notice. The absence of advance notice was itself a communication, the kind that says we are coming, and we expect you to receive us regardless of your schedule. which is the way delegations communicate when they want to establish a particular kind of authority before they arrive. I was not particularly interested in them establishing that kind of authority before they arrived. I keyed the channel, Keth's Wake Station to diplomatic delegation vessels. You are approaching sovereign autonomous territory. Standard docking protocol applies. Primary port has capacity for one vessel at a time. Queue at 15-minute intervals, and transmit your docking requests in standard format. Welcome to Keth's Wake. A pause. Then, in careful trade language with a Veth accent overlay, this is the Outer Corridor Administrative Delegation of the Galactic Tribunal. We request priority docking access. Keth's Wake does not operate a priority access system, I said. Queue at 15-minute intervals. Your request for docking has been logged. First vessel may approach. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, understood. First vessel approaching. Skitek appeared in the monitoring station doorway. She had been listening on the secondary audio feed that ran through the workshop speaker. Tribunal delegation, she said. Yes, I said. All three branches, she said. Yes, I said. She looked at the display for a moment. They are here to assess whether to maintain the provisional recognition. They are here, I said, to see whether the human is still alive, and whether what he built is real, and whether it has become something they need to engage with formally, rather than something they can quietly reclassify as a mistake. She was quiet for a moment. And has it? Walk around your own station, I said. You tell me. She was quiet for a moment longer. Then she went back to the workshop. The Veth administrative counselor who led the first vessel's delegation was named Veth Pran. She was the kind of senior official who had spent decades navigating power structures successfully enough to recognize a new one when she was standing inside it. She moved through the station with the controlled observation of someone building a comprehensive picture, and she looked at the monitoring station traffic display with the attention of a person who understood immediately what she was seeing and what it meant. The Devon 6 classification correction, she said, after a long look at the display. Was that your primary objective in the negotiation with Counselor Drav Hess? No, I said. It was the most important one. She looked at me. The difference? I said. Primary objectives are what you present to the other party first, I said. Important objectives are what you need when the conversation is finished. A pause. The correction establishes a precedent. Any tribunal action against a human under Confederation jurisdiction is now subject to challenge under justified intervention provisions. Yes, I said. That was deliberate, she said. Everything here was deliberate, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the Veth Confederation did not authorize Commander Arok's action on Devon 6. That has been established through internal review. It was not made public because a public acknowledgement would require a formal review process that the Confederation preferred to avoid initiating. I said nothing and waited. I am not authorized to deliver a formal statement to that effect in any official capacity, she said. I am telling you so that you have it recorded in your own station logs. I appreciate that, I said. She left the next morning along with the rest of her delegation, and the human envoy's vessel departed 2 hours after, and the tribunal administrative ship followed. They had each come to see Keth's Wake, and they had each seen it, and none of them left the same way they arrived. They had all come expecting something they could categorize and contain. None of them found that. The observer status vote happened 41 days after the delegation's departure. Gareth brought the result on his next run and set the data chip on the monitoring station console without saying anything first, which was how I knew what was on it. The motion had passed. Not unanimously, not without substantial debate, if the session summary attached to the notification was to be believed, but it had passed. Keth's Wake had a seat at the Galactic Tribunal session table, non-voting. Observer status, independent outer corridor territory representation. I sat with that for a moment in the quiet of the monitoring station. Then I filed the notification in the archive, pulled up the morning traffic log, and started the day. Skitek found me in the monitoring station that evening. She stood in the doorway reading the observer status notification on her handheld device, and when she looked up, her expression carried the specific quality it got when a calculation had resolved in a direction she had considered but not fully committed to expecting. "You knew the vote would pass," she said. "I thought it would," I said. "I did not know it." "Drav Hess abstained," she said. "As agreed," I said. "3 votes against," she said. "All from VETH delegation members." "I know." "Everyone else voted in favor." She set the handheld down and looked at the corridor display. "When you were in that airlock on day 1, with 30 days of food and a multi-tool, did you think there was a path to this?" I considered the question honestly, because she asked honest questions and deserved honest answers. "I thought there was a path to surviving," I said. "A path to rebuilding the station to a functional level. A path to making myself difficult enough to remove that removing me would cost more than leaving me alone." Those 3 things together pointed in a general direction. I could not see the specific shape of what was at the end of it. "But you knew there was something at the end of it," she said. "I knew there would be, if the work was done correctly," I said. "Work done correctly always produces something. What it produces depends on the direction. I chose the direction carefully." She was quiet for a long moment. The corridor traffic scrolled across the display between us. Somewhere in the station's midsection, I could hear Peter running a component check on one of the atmospheric maintenance units, the regular metallic sound of competent people doing necessary work. "The tribunal is going to continue watching this station," she said. "The observer status gives us visibility in their processes. It also gives them visibility in ours." "Yes," I said. "You are not concerned about that," she said. It was not a question. "We are not doing anything that requires concealment," I said. "We are running a waypoint station in a corridor that needed one. We are housing people who needed housing. We are refueling ships that needed fuel. The tribunal's visibility into those activities is not a vulnerability. It is an advertisement." She made the sound that was not entirely agreement and not entirely skepticism, which had come to mean, in my experience of her, that she found the logic sound and found the confidence behind it either impressive or slightly concerning, and had not yet decided which. She went back to the workshop. The weeks after the observer status notification passed, with the same productive rhythm as the months before them. The distinction between having the status and not having it was less dramatic in daily terms than I had expected. Ships docked and departed. The fuel processing unit ran its cycles. Adele's hydroponic section continued its quiet, green, steady output. The 2 children who had arrived with Adele's group 18 months ago had been joined by a third, born aboard the station, which made Keth's Wake the birthplace of exactly 1 person so far, a detail that Adele pointed out with the specific satisfaction of someone who understands what it means for a place to have a birth as part of its record. Neil, the former tribunal administrative worker, spent 3 weeks studying the observer status provisions and the foundational charter sections that underpinned the Devon 6 classification correction, and produced a written analysis that identified 7 additional precedent implications I had not yet explored. I read it twice. I added 2 of the 7 to an active list. The other 5 went into a longer-term file. Neil was good at this kind of work. He was also, I noticed, quietly and consistently happy, in a way that he had not appeared to be in the early weeks after his arrival. He mentioned once, almost in passing, that he had not slept soundly in several years while working for the tribunal, and that he was sleeping well now. I did not say anything about this. It did not need to be said. The monitoring system logged the approach of the diplomatic delegation 3 days before they arrived. 6 vessels, identified from the registration codes in Edron's navigation data package, as belonging to 3 separate tribunal-adjacent delegations. I notified the crew at the morning meeting and told them to continue all operations on standard schedule, because the best thing we could do when important visitors were coming was to be exactly what we were, doing exactly what we did, which was run a station competently and without drama. Skitek asked if she should prepare any specific materials for the visit. I said no. "They can see what we have," I said. Prepared materials would suggest we are trying to present something different from what we have. We are not. What we have is the presentation. She nodded once, which meant she agreed, and found the reasoning sound, and had nothing to add to it. We were ready when the first vessel docked, not because we had done anything differently to prepare, because we had been ready since the day I filed the provisional recognition notification next to the Day 2 calculation, and went back to work. 2 years after the tribunal sentenced me to die in the outer corridor, they sent a full diplomatic delegation to Keth's wake. They called it a courtesy visit in the official communique. I recognized it for what it actually was. They came to confirm with their own eyes that the human was still there, that Keth's wake was genuinely real and genuinely operating, and not going to quietly disappear from the corridor's traffic logs the way they might have hoped in the months after the provisional recognition. It was not going to disappear. Every month that passed added another layer to what we had built. Another ship that had docked. Another person who knew this station existed, and that it worked, and that it was not going anywhere. The delegation was larger than anything that had docked at Keth's wake before. 6 vessels, arriving in sequence over 2 days and filling every port we had with overflow ships, holding in approach formation while they waited. A full diplomatic party that included trade representatives from 3 Confederation members, a tribunal cartographer who kept looking at the corridor monitoring display with an expression that suggested she was doing significant mental revision of her professional assumptions, and in the 3rd vessel that docked, a young human woman in a formal diplomatic uniform who stepped off the ship and introduced herself as Claire Nolan, envoy from the human homeworld, with a handshake that was slightly more firm than necessary, in the way of someone who has been briefed to project confidence, and is executing the briefing carefully. She was the first official human contact I had received in 2 full years. Claire had been prepared thoroughly. She had read the sentencing transcript and the subsequent tribunal communiques, and the observer status notification, and every piece of official documentation that existed in any accessible record. She had been briefed by 3 separate teams. She had studied Keth 9's original tribunal designation and the technical specifications that supported the non-viable classification. The briefings had not prepared her for the station itself. She stopped in the docking bay after stepping off her ship and looked around with the specific expression that I had come to recognize on everyone who arrived at Keth's wake for the first time. The expression of someone recalibrating urgently between what they had prepared to find and what was actually in front of them. "I was told to expect a survival operation," she said. "This stopped being a survival operation some time ago," I said. She looked at me with the focused attention of someone who understood that the briefings she had received were insufficient and was compensating by observing directly. "How long ago?" she asked. "Day 90, I said. "Approximately. The hydroponic bay produced food on day 85. I added a second rack that same afternoon. At that point, it was no longer survival. It was something else." "What would you call what it became?" she said. "A community," I said, "and a waypoint, and a demonstration." "A demonstration of what?" she said. "Of what the outer corridor looks like when it has a stop," I said. "Of what happens when you put infrastructure in a place that existing power structures have decided is not worth infrastructure. Of what one person can build in 14 months with a multi-tool kit, and a dead station, and sufficient motivation." She absorbed this. Then she said, carefully, "The homeworld sent me to understand what you have built, and what you intend for it. Not to negotiate formal terms today. To understand, so that future conversations can be better informed." "Then let me show you," I said. I walked her through all of it. We started in the hydroponic section, where Adele and Fiona were running the afternoon yield assessment, and the 2 children were helping with water level checks in the way that children help with tasks, which is enthusiastically, and not always in the most efficient direction. We moved to the workshop where Kale was completing a navigation array rebuild for a ship that had docked for emergency repair work 3 days prior. We went to the fabrication room where Peter was running the unit through a component production cycle for the atmospheric processor maintenance schedule. We finished in the monitoring station where the corridor traffic display showed its quiet, constant pulse. Claire stood in front of the traffic display for a long time. "The corridor volume," she said. "The official charts don't show this route. No, I said. But you have records going back over a year. Day 23, I said. That was when I got the passive scanner operational enough to begin reliable logging. She looked at the patterns on the display, at the regularity of the traffic, at what a year and more of accumulated monitoring revealed about a route that had been busy long before anyone who kept official records knew it existed. This is significant intelligence, she said. It is significant leverage, I said, which is not the same thing. She turned from the display and looked at me directly. She had been building toward this question throughout the tour, and had been deciding when to ask it. What do you want from the human homeworld? She said. It was a direct question. She had earned a direct answer. Nothing today, I said. Not yet. What I want right now is for the homeworld to know that this exists. That a human built it. That the tribunal could not prevent it, could not remove it, and has now, even if reluctantly, recognized it. That is the message I want delivered. She was quiet for a moment. And beyond today? Beyond today, I said. I want to be able to call on the homeworld as a neighbor when there is reason to. Not as an authority above this station. Not as a patron that Keth's wake answers to. A neighbor, an equal. Someone you call when the corridor gets complicated, and you need another perspective from someone who has an interest in the same stretch of space. She understood. I could see the understanding settle in her expression, the specific quality of someone recognizing that the situation they had been briefed on, and the situation actually in front of them, are the same situation understood from different angles. I will carry that back accurately, she said. That is all I am asking, I said. The Veth administrative portion of the delegation was the most complex part of the visit. Councillor Veth Pran arrived on the second day and moved through the station with the same controlled assessment she had brought on the earlier visit, but this time with 3 additional officials in her party, each of them watching with the attention of people who had been sent to gather specific information and were taking their responsibility seriously. The central official question behind their visit was whether Keth's wake, now that it had observer status, was going to use that position to press formally for an expanded review of the Devon 6 incident and its internal handling within the Veth Confederation. The classification correction I had obtained through Drav Hess was a precedent, not a closed matter. Precedents have directions they move in. I met with Veth Pran privately in the monitoring station, while the rest of her delegation was being walked through the fuel processing facility by Skitek, who was explaining the processing rates with the particular kind of technical enthusiasm that she reserved for people she was reasonably certain could follow along. Veth Pran sat across the monitoring station table from me and said, "The classification correction. You understood when you requested it that it creates an ongoing mechanism." "Yes," I said. "The Confederation is aware of this," she said. "I expected they would be," I said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the corridor display with the focus of someone who uses the act of looking at something as a way of organizing their thoughts. "The Confederation's internal review of the Devon 6 incident has been completed," she said. "The findings have not been published. They will not be published in their current form. But the findings exist, and they are what they are, and the Confederation's position in any future formal review would be materially complicated by their existence." "I understand," I said. "What I am communicating," she said, with careful precision, "is that the Confederation has a strong interest in the observer status arrangement at the tribunal, functioning smoothly and productively, and in Keth's wake, operating as a stable, predictable, and cooperative independent waypoint, in a corridor where stability and predictability have value to multiple parties." "That is also my interest," I said. She looked at me. "Is that a commitment?" "It is an alignment of interests," I said, "which is more durable than a commitment, because it does not require trust." A long silence. Then, for the first time in either of our conversations, something changed very slightly in her expression. Not a smile, exactly. Something more controlled than that. The acknowledgement of a well-constructed point. "Keth 9 was chosen specifically for this assignment," she said. "I know," I said. "The reasoning, at the time, was sound," she said. The station's condition was accurately documented. The resources provided were within the range that the assessment indicated would produce a natural outcome. The assessment was sound, I said. The variable that was not assessed accurately was the person. She considered this. That is a fair characterization of what occurred. The assessment did not account, I said, for the specific relationship between humans and impossible situations. We do not experience impossible situations the way the model assumed. We experience them as engineering problems. Veth Prawn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, 412 people. On Devon 6. Yes, I said. They are still alive, she said. Yes, I said. She stood and straightened her formal jacket. I will recommend to the Confederation that the observer status arrangement at the tribunal be supported in the next session review, and I will recommend that the corridor mapping revision to include this route in official tribunal navigation charts be advanced through the administrative committee. That second recommendation, I said, is the more valuable one. I know, she said. That is why I am offering it. She left with her delegation that afternoon. The human diplomatic vessel was the last to depart, leaving late on the third day. Claire Nolan stood at the airlock threshold before boarding and looked back at the station one more time, the way people look at something they are trying to fix accurately in memory. One question I did not ask during the tour, she said. Go ahead, I said. Day 1, she said. When you stepped through the airlock into a dead station with 30 days of rations and a multi-tool kit, what did you think was going to happen? I had thought about this question in various forms many times over the past 2 years. I had an honest answer. I thought I was going to work, I said. I did not know the specific shape it would take. I could not have. But I knew that the work was going to matter if I pointed it correctly. That is the thing about work done in the right direction. It accumulates. Each piece creates the conditions for the next piece. You do not need to see the final shape at the beginning. You need to be able to see the next piece from where you are standing. She looked at me for a long moment. The tribunal gave you a dead station, she said. They gave me the quietest and most focused 2 years of my life, I said. 41 light years from anyone who could interrupt the work. No distractions. No competing demands. Just the station and the corridor, and whatever I was willing to build. She boarded her ship. It undocked cleanly and moved away into the corridor. I watched it on the external camera until it was out of sensor range. Then I went back inside and walked through the station, the way I did at the end of each day, not for inspection but for the specific satisfaction of moving through a space that had been nothing and was now something, and had become something because of work done one piece at a time. The hydroponic section was quiet in the evening cycle, grow racks standing in their rows with the soft, steady presence of living things. The workshop was clean and organized in the way that a space used by skilled people tends to become organized over time, without anyone deciding it should be, and without anyone having to maintain it. The monitoring station hummed at its regular pace, corridor traffic scrolling across the display. I sat in the monitoring station chair and pulled up the voice log archive. I found the file labeled Day 1 and played it back. My own voice, from 2 years ago, in the cold engineering section of a dead station, with the reactor cold and the air barely breathable, and the orange emergency lighting pressing down on the first words I had spoken into the void. Day 1. Life support at minimum function. Reactor is cold but the housing is intact. Starting repair assessment tomorrow. I closed the file. I opened a new one. Day 738, I said. Keth's Wake holds recognized autonomous territory status with observer representation at the Galactic Tribunal. Crew of 15 permanent residents with 2 more families in transit. Corridor traffic at 32 regular contacts and growing. Hydroponic output sufficient for the station population with surplus commercial capacity. Fuel processing running at 3 times original capacity following Edrin and Kale's secondary unit installation. Communication array at full operational range. I paused. The diplomatic delegation has departed. All 3 components. The VETH administrative delegation will recommend corridor route mapping revision to include the Keth's Wake corridor in official tribunal navigation charts. That recommendation will pass. When it passes, This route becomes visible on every ship's navigation system in the explored corridor network. Every captain who wants to avoid checkpoint routes will find this stop on their chart automatically. Traffic will increase significantly. Another pause. I have been thinking about what Counselor Drav Hess said when he stood in this station 14 months ago. He said the classification was correct at the time. He was right about that. The documentation was accurate. The station was what it was documented to be. The variable that the assessment missed was the person they sent here. I looked at the corridor display. At the traffic moving through our space, in the quiet, steady rhythm that 2 years of operation had established. The tribunal understands power as a fixed thing, I said. As something you hold, or do not hold. As something distributed from the top of a structure downward. What they do not fully account for is what happens when you put someone with sufficient capability and sufficient motivation in a quiet place and give them enough time. Power built from the ground up, from nothing, from a dead station and a multi-tool kit and 30 days of rations, is a different kind of thing than power distributed from above. It does not behave the same way. It does not have the same dependencies. It cannot be withdrawn the same way. I saved the log and filed it. A new contact appeared on the edge of the display. Drive signature I did not recognize from any previous log entry. Unregistered. Heading on an approach course toward our primary docking port at a careful, deliberate speed. The speed of someone who has heard about a place and is approaching it for the first time, and is not entirely certain of what to expect. I had seen that specific approach speed many times. It always meant the same thing. I opened the channel. Unregistered vessel approaching Keth's wake. Please state your business and docking request. Static. Then a voice, tired the way corridor pilots get tired. Rough at the edges, careful in the middle. Heard there was a stop out here, the voice said. Heard it was run by a human. It is, I said. Heard it used to be a dead station, the voice said. It was, I said. The station's automated greeting activated on the secondary channel, the way it activated for every new contact that entered our range. The greeting I had written on day 90, and never changed, because it remained accurate. Welcome to Keth's wake. We were dead once. Come in. The unregistered vessel adjusted its heading, and began its approach to the primary port, coming in from the dark the way everything worthwhile eventually comes in from the dark. Steadily, with purpose, toward a light that someone decided to build and decided to keep burning. I watched it come, and thought about day one, about orange lights and cold air, and a multi-tool kit, and the specific moment in the empty engineering section, when I made the decision that the dark was not an ending. It was a project. And I had always been very good at seeing projects through to what they were supposed to become. I stayed at the monitoring station longer than usual that night. The night cycle was quiet, the way night cycles get quiet on a station that has found its rhythm, the specific productive silence of systems running correctly, and people sleeping soundly, and everything that needs to be happening without requiring intervention. I had learned to recognize that silence. In the early months it had not existed. In the early months there had always been something that needed immediate attention, some gap in the system that required energy right now. The silence of a well-running station is something you build toward over a long time, and only notice when it arrives. I thought about the 412 people in the cargo hold on Devon 6, 2 years and 4 months ago now. I thought about them the way I had thought about them every day since the night I stepped off the transport that took me to the sentencing. Not with regret, because I had made the only choice available to me and I would make it again without hesitation, but with the awareness that they were the reason. Everything here had a reason and they were it. 412 people who were alive and somewhere in the corridor network doing whatever they were doing because they were alive. They did not know about Keth's wake. Most of them probably did not know the name David Kale. That was exactly as it should be. The work was not for the recognition. The recognition was just how you knew the work was pointing in the right direction. I pulled up the monitoring display and set it to the wide view corridor mode, the full 40 light-year sphere of space that the passive array could read, and I looked at all of it for a while. The mass signatures of ships in transit, The warm smear of a freighter's drive emissions. The clean geometric pulse of a vessel running its navigation lights because it had nothing to hide from, and was making no effort to disappear. Our corridor. Our station in the middle of it. I turned off the display and went to the rest area and slept the way I had slept on day one, which was soundly, and without difficulty, and with the specific ease of a person who knows exactly what they are doing and why they are doing it. Tomorrow there would be work to do. There was always work to do. That was the point.